Okay, 1, 2, 3, here we go.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to the first TAN webinar of our series. My name is Anand Kalra, and I am the Program Administrator for Trans Advocacy Network. The host today will be Mason Dunn of Massachusetts Transgender Political Coalition, and I will hand over to him now.
Hey everyone, thanks for being here tonight. So as Anand said, I'm Mason, new Executive Director of the Massachusetts Transgender Political Coalition. Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. So before we get started, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Trans Advocacy Network and what we do and our role. So as the slide says, what we exist to do is bring together trans organizations from across the country to network and provide resources for one another and really just build a stronger movement as trans organizations across the country. So you can see on that slide we have our website, the transadvocacynetwork.org. We're also on Facebook, which is also helpful, and we put a lot of information out on Facebook. If there's anybody on the webinar who is not a member of the Trans Advocacy Network, you can go on our website and add to be a member. So that's a quick introduction of the Trans Advocacy Network. We hope that if you're not a member, please join, and if you are a member, thanks for being a part. So a little bit about who's on the webinar today. As I said, I'm Mason. I'm on the TAN Steering Committee, as well as working with the Mass Trans Political Coalition. In the background, we have Anand, who is our technical support. He also works for TAN and the Transgender Law Center. And then briefly, I'm going to introduce, we have Owen from Equality Utah and Lisa from the, sorry, I've lost my place here, there we go, from the National Center for Transgender Equality. So Owen, if I could have you really quickly introduce yourself.
Sure. Hey, everybody. I'm Owen. I work for Equality Utah as a community programs manager, but I used to run all the transgender programming at Equality Maryland before that. I have about 9 years of experience working and organizing transgender and LGBT communities around education and different campaigns, and I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here, Owen. And Lisa.
Sure. So my name is Lisa Mottet. I have been doing transgender rights work since 2001 when I helped get the Transgender Civil Rights Project started at the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force. I worked there for 12 years. And then last year I moved over to the National Center for Transgender Equality, where I'm Deputy Executive Director, and I'm having a lot of fun working for transgender rights and expanding the resources and making state and local organizations stronger to work for equality.
Great. Thanks so much, Lisa. So I know we have a few people on the webinar today, so if we could have people introduce themselves, if we can unmute them and have people introduce who they are, where they're from, and what their interest is in employment non-discrimination work.
Everyone should be unmuted now. I see we have Marissa. Could you lead us off? Sometimes there's an issue with if you're using the mic and speakers on your computer, it won't work. So if you are trying to speak right now, then we're not able to hear you, then you can call into the number that is on your webcam. If you have questions throughout, or if you have any technical issues,
then I encourage everyone to use the chat function, which is on your control panel. And if you have any questions about how to access that, please send me an email, which is anand, A-N-A-N-D, at transgenderlawcenter.org.
And I'll let you know we're having a little bit of feedback on your mic.
On my end. Okay, so let me see what I can do here about that.
I muted my phone, not me.
Please enter your access code followed by the pound or hash sign. All right, some technical difficulties. We're working out some bugs here. So while we're waiting on that, we're having a little bit of feedback, so actually I won't keep going. There we go.
Oh, I see. The issue was I had unmuted Marissa. We were still picking up audio from her computer speakers.
Okay, I see.
And I see we also have Vicky. Vicky, can you introduce yourself?
Okay. Well, since we're having some problems there, we can keep going here and do some webinar housekeeping, just to let everybody know a little bit more about the system. So there should be the ability to text questions via a chat box. So if you have any questions in the midst of the webinar, you can chat those via the chat box. We'll also have time for questions at the end of the webinar, and you can, there's a little raise hand feature, and you can do that to raise your hand and ask an audio question at the end of the webinar. But given the fact that we're having some audio problems, it might just be best to have chat questions for now. If you need technical support, Anand, can you give people the phone number to call you at?
Yes, the phone number to call me at is 415-865-0176, extension 305.
Excellent. So yeah, if people have any technical difficulties, they can call Anand, and he will help walk you through that. So moving on just to some quick ground rules for discussion for the webinar. I realize this is less of a discussion now that there's less audio features, but just good things to be aware of as we're having this discussion. And Anand, if you can hit the next, yeah, there we go. So we encourage safe, respectful forum here, and we encourage questions and the opportunity to learn about employment non-discrimination and its passage and work around that. We really encourage people who maybe don't have the opportunity to step up and ask questions about this type of thing to really take this opportunity to step up. But if this is something that you have a lot of information on or you know a lot about, we also encourage you to step back and allow others to step up and ask those questions. And then a question I consistently ask myself at these types of things is, wait, why am I talking? Sometimes I'm asking myself that as I'm talking. So if you begin asking a question or start talking and you kind of lose your train of thought, or you aren't sure exactly why you're talking, just have the thought to ask yourself that. In this kind of work, we like to assume best intentions, especially when we're on an online forum and it's a little harder to communicate. So if somebody says something that you feel and it's kind of an ouch moment for you, please try and assume best intentions in this forum. But also, if you say something that you realize later it might have been disrespectful or inconsiderate of somebody's feelings, please own that impact on people's feelings. And also, if somebody says something that you and you say that really hurt, you know, own the impact of your words and how that impacts others. The number one rule, at least in my book here today, is to participate. If you have questions, Owen and Lisa are fantastic experts in this area, so I really encourage you to participate and ask questions, whether you're viewing this as a recording or in person, obviously. Really, I hope that you participate with this and be present for this webinar. Have this opportunity to ask questions and participate with this by being present. And the last rule that I have here is very important. A lot of us are doing this work right now. We're working on policy issues at the state, local, or even federal level for some people. So there might be some really important information that needs to stay confidential. If there are names or things going on that need to stay confidential, I ask that you please keep that confidentiality and respect that. So that's a whole lot of ground rules. The next issue and really consideration is, why are we talking about employment non-discrimination and why now? Recently, TAN did a survey of its membership and realized that a lot of people were giving us feedback that they wanted to see webinars, and particularly they wanted to see webinars about employment non-discrimination. That was a major topic that kept reoccurring in the survey. So we wanted to take this opportunity. This is the first webinar that we're doing, and the first opportunity that we're really having to share information amongst the network. So we thought it was important that we do the topic that was the most heavily requested. So we are doing this on employment non-discrimination partially because of that survey. It's also a timely situation right now. ENDA, as well as the state of trans equality work across the country, is really focusing on employment non-discrimination on many levels, so I think it's important and timely at this point in time to really talk about it. And lastly, of course, there are the elements of statistics. We've seen a lot of statistics over the last few years about the issues of unemployment, underemployment, and employment discrimination against the trans community. And so for those reasons, we thought it was timely to really raise this issue as our first webinar. So with all of that being said, I am now going to turn it over to Owen and Lisa to talk a little bit about ENDA and the state movement.
Sure. So I get to start us off here to talk about kind of national and state landscape. The first thing to know is we are still waiting to pass the Employment Non-Discrimination Act on the federal level. The most recent thing that happened was, well, it was about 6 months ago, the Senate passed ENDA to add gender identity to, federal statutes to protect trans people. Passed it 64 to 32, which was an amazing, amazing vote. We had 10 Republicans join with all the Democrats and independents to vote yes. So that was a great thing that happened in November. The bill, however, is stuck in the House, where we've yet to get the House Speaker to bring it to a vote. We do think it was brought to a vote. We have the vote, but what we really need is 218 people, which is the amount of votes we need in the House. We need 218 people to say that they will vote yes for sure, and to put that pressure on him. Right now we have about 202 or so folks who publicly said they vote yes. So that's what ENDA is. There is a very large coalition trying to push ENDA through the House called Americans for Workplace Opportunity. You can find them on the website. I think it's workplaceopportunity.org. My organization, NCTE, is part of that, but there's a lot of other LGBT organizations and unions working together to try to pass that bill. And there's also, I should mention, a transgender lobby day that's going to be soon will be announced in July to focus on that. A lot of people say, though, but why do we need ENDA? We've got sex discrimination protections in federal law, right? So Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act says that discrimination based on sex in employment is illegal. And thankfully, due to a lot of work from a lot of folks over the last couple decades, we've seen more and more that courts have held that, yes, sex discrimination laws, especially Title VII, the federal law, protects transgender people. Now, courts have not been entirely uniform on that, so there's no guarantee that someone would win their case, but it is helpful to know that a lot of courts do agree to that basic premise. And importantly, actually, was it 2012? I think it must have been 2012. The Transgender Law Center actually brought a case before the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC agency, and they declared that their interpretation is also that transgender people have full protections under sex discrimination. This is an amazing win, and it's wonderful to have a federal agency now that people can complain to and potentially get their complaints resolved through. So it's kind of like we have a federal law in that sense, because the sex discrimination law is operating that way. However, there's no clarity in federal law yet, right? We really do need to, the employers and the public needs to see the words gender identity to know that they're not really supposed to discriminate in the first place. It's one thing to have remedies if it happens, like you can try to file a lawsuit and go to the EEOC, but we also need really, these laws work best if people stop and don't discriminate in the first place. So that's what what a good, clear federal law would do. So let's talk about state and local laws. At this point, we have 18 states that have passed a non-discrimination law. We're actually still on the last slide. We've got 18 states that have gender identity in their statewide non-discrimination law. And there are three additional states that have sexual orientation but don't have gender identity. Those are New York, New Hampshire, and Wisconsin. So a decade ago, there were about 10 of those states, and now we're down to 3 because we've been able to pass trans-specific catch-up bills in many of the states, although they have not all been perfect. And I wanted to mention that here because it does matter. The last couple that have passed, Maryland and Delaware, both have sex-segregated facilities language in them that is very problematic and disappointing on multiple levels. So we need to be aware that as we try to pass these laws, that's a risk, and we'll talk about that more. But the last 2 passed with facilities language, and the one that passed before that, actually, Mason, as you know, Massachusetts, opted not to do a sex-segregated facilities exemption, but instead took out public accommodations before passage in order to avoid some of the debates that go on around that. So we do also have a lot of local laws, though, a lot of great local laws, and they add up to protecting about 48% of the country at this point. I need to redo my math, and NCTE needs to get this up on our website, but we're at about 48% of the country covered by either a state or a local law. So that's where we are. Owen, I'm turning it back over to you.
Woohoo! Thanks, Lisa. I wanted to talk a little bit about the difference between working in the 2 different states I've worked in, right? I've worked on non-discrimination in 2 different states. Maryland, I worked in for 4 years for a trans-specific non-discrimination statewide ordinance that was in a blue state. So there was a lot of Democrats and more friendly people. And now I live and work in Utah, which is this lovely red state that has a lot of Republicans. And so I just wanted to give you some of the things that I've learned that are a little bit different and nuanced, and some of the things that are the same, right? So I know that there are folks on here from Tennessee, and that's a lovely red state too, so I'm hoping some of this will transfer. So some really interesting things are the difference between community acceptance and participation. So in Maryland, due to a lot of hurt that happened with trans folks being kind of excluded from the original non-discrimination, when they made the decision to remove trans folks from the original statewide ordinance, there was a lot of hurt, and it took many years to, with every year, people saying, "Oh, we'll get you next year," or "We'll get you next year," to actually get the bill passed, and it just finally passed a month ago or so. So there was a lot of community hurt and some buy-in stuff and some issues around trust and the trans community feeling like empowered leaders and what that looked like. Whereas in Utah, Utah has decided to take a really inclusive approach, and they don't pass any legislation unless it includes trans folks. So consequently, whereas Maryland started making local jurisdictional advances starting in 2002, Utah didn't get a local jurisdiction to start to pass until 2009. And both places went to the liberal urban center to start that work. So Maryland went to Baltimore, Utah went to Salt Lake City. An interesting fun fact about Utah is it is the capital of Mormonism, or the LDS religion, Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And although LDS folks may oppose marriage equality very publicly, They came out with public support for the 2009 non-discrimination ordinance in Salt Lake City, and actually gave testimony to why they support it. And that was a huge thing that took a lot of conversational relationship building to be able to get folks to the place where they felt comfortable doing that. But it was actually a really huge win here. Some other interesting dynamics are in Utah. It is a Republican state, and for years our statewide sponsor was a Democrat, and they this past year it was a Republican LDS active churchgoer who was our Republican churchgoer that was our sponsor from Southern Utah, and he was pretty awesome and totally on it, understood how to talk about trans issues as well as gay, lesbian, and bisexual issues, and always and never left trans people out when he was talking, and was very, very clear about his desire for people to know that he would drop the bill if they tried to pass it without trans folks. So that was really awesome. It was really great to have a sponsor like that. In both places, there was a huge desire and need to create a coalition to move all legislation forward. So in Maryland, it was called the Maryland Coalition for Transgender Equality, which was really big and robust and awesome, and we'll talk a little bit more about coalitions in a little while. But we, and in Utah, we had the opportunity for all coalition. Both places wouldn't have gotten anywhere near as far as they did, and Maryland wouldn't have passed without having that coalitional angle either, or many people believe that they wouldn't have gotten as much traction as they did without. So there was that. Another really interesting thing that I noticed in both places is both places passed local jurisdictional protections, so that about half of the population was covered under local jurisdictions in terms of non-discrimination before they went for a statewide. In Utah, that looks like having 20 local jurisdictions, and in Maryland, it was 4. Well, 4.5. Hydesville, I don't know what to call that. So yeah, so that's actually all I'm going to say right now. So I'm going to pass over to Lisa.
Okay, great. And I'm supposed to give you some, actually go back to the old slide, thoughts about what's changed in the last decade. One of the things, well, the community has so much more visibility now, right? It used to be trans people were truly, back in like 2001, 2002, 2003, 2004, although it still feels sometimes that trans folks and the letter T is added to LGBT without much thought and without much true devotion to it. Back then, trans folks were getting cut out of bills a lot, and there was a lot more internal fighting that we had to do inside the movement to get our LGBT allies to stick up for trans folks. There's also so much more visibility now of just trans people generally, so that legislators actually know who we're talking about when we say transgender people. Not necessarily always true a decade ago. And this has a lot of benefits, obviously. It means we have less education we have to do. It means that the media and society and we collectively, people, by being out as trans people and allies, have done a lot of work to create legislators who are actually sympathetic kind of automatically to transgender folks. Unfortunately, as the opposition, though, to LGBT non-discrimination laws they've also changed and matured, I guess, over the last 10 years, so that they now really target trans folks as the reason the bill goes too far, right? Like, oh, we're not against non-discrimination, but it goes too far when it's going to potentially, we've heard it all, and we'll talk a little bit more about, this is going to cause attacks in the bathroom and loss of privacy for women and children, et cetera. So they've really shifted their message a lot to very often attack trans folks very directly, or say, oh, they even sometimes say, you know, no, it's not trans people, it's just those predators who are going to take advantage of the trans non-discrimination law and try to pretend that they're pro-equality when in fact they're not. So, so that's, I would say, are some of the biggest changes. So back in 2001, when we passed a law in Rhode Island to add gender identity to the sexual orientation non-discrimination law that passed the year before, it was actually portrayed as kind of like a technical amendment. Oh, when we were passing the sexual orientation law, we didn't, you know, include gender identity like we should have, to make clear this is just going with original intent to make sure that all LGBT people are covered. It was kind of a strange, like almost unbelievable line that folks in Rhode Island were able to use. And now, you know, adding transgender folks to the law in New York or Wisconsin or New Hampshire, it's like this massive, huge political list. We can't get away with just saying it's a technical anymore. Yeah. So, yeah, I think that's all I wanted to include about what has changed in the last decade. I think we can go on to Owen, who's going to talk a little bit about how we get the campaign off the ground when you're just in the beginning stages of putting together an effort. So, Owen.
Yeah, totally. So let's just get started on talking about getting started. So one of the things that I think is the most important thing is community prep work, right? And what that can look like, and some things that you should ask yourself while you're starting to prepare. And I think the number one thing is making sure that the trans community is like on board and included in the strategy and plan of what you're doing. And is it even something that the trans community thinks that they should be working on right now? Like, should it be non-discrimination, or are more people in your community asking for, you know, driver's license document changes, or something else? I don't know. Healthcare, whatever. So making sure that that is, so folks are engaged and involved and talking to you about what is going on. It goes a long way to heal hurt if hurt is there and needs to be healed, right? And it also like empowers more leaders. So the next thing I'm going to suggest is having a large, broad, diverse, empowered group of transgender leaders, which like also includes trans specific programs. If you are in an organization that is, I don't know that anybody here is, but in an organization that has LGBT, making sure that there is a trans-specific program involved to engage those folks, so that more leaders are being developed and empowered and brought through this entire process. I'm going to give an example. So in Maryland, we didn't really have a lot of leaders that were diverse and empowered. So what we did is we ran a Transgender Leadership Academy to get the breadth of all the different types of leaders that we knew needed to be present at the table that weren't currently, that were willing to work together. That's the other part of this, right? Like, people need to be willing to work together. And sometimes that's more complicated than one would think. So, so yeah. Have I missed a thing, Lisa? Sorry, technical problem.
Sorry, I was on mute.
It's okay. I think I...
Did you want me to jump in here about the community prep work and kind of LGBT efforts? Okay. One of the things that I've seen a lot of states happen in a lot of states lately is that there's an LGBT non-discrimination effort that's kind of moving forward, and all the LGB and allied leaders know that they need to be trans inclusive, and so gender identity is in the bill, but they really don't have any trans people involved in the LGBT organization or in the effort. So one of the things I just wanted to point out is that sometimes there's got to be a set of folks that says, like, look, our community needs to be engaged and organized and engaged. It doesn't have, the community doesn't have to join that LGBT effort, like it doesn't have to be a part of the LGBT organization, but there should be some type of organized trans presence that becomes part of that non-discrimination effort. Otherwise, We've got LGBT folks and allies making decisions for us or in consultation with just the one trans person that they're working with, et cetera. So just remember that we have to do that. One of the ways, I'm going to give you a couple examples. In Pennsylvania right now, there is an effort to pass an LGBT non-discrimination bill, and NCTE is actually part of an effort to organize the trans community independently of that non-discrimination effort. So people are coming together across the state to create what's going to be probably called something like the Pennsylvania Trans Justice Network. And it's going to work on its own issues, and it's going to have a kind of relationship with the non-discrimination campaign. But that community prep work, folks actually needed to be gathered together, not just on the issue of non-discrimination, but on all the trans issues that many of which feel more compelling at the moment than non-discrimination, right? Like homeless shelter access, treatment in jails and prisons and things like that. So that's what we're doing in Pennsylvania to get real engagement. Another thing I wanted to just mention is that, well, there have been a few places lately, Wyoming, West Virginia, and Nebraska are a few places where the LGBT non-discrimination effort has just been completely absent of transgender folks. Really, very, very much true, apparently, in Wyoming and Nebraska. In West Virginia, there were a couple of trans folks, but they were pretty marginalized within the organization there. So it's just been a struggle, and there has to be this effort to get everyone kind of moving the same direction. So, Owen, I'll give it back to you. You want to talk about the education plan?
Sure, yeah. So the next thing that we think is really important to get things off the ground is getting an educational plan in place where you are talking about collecting stories and journeys of support from allies to support trans folks. So just as an example, in the 45 legislative session in Utah, we identified over 180 stories of people that were impactful to move the lawmakers to support folks, which is a really big deal in a very short period of time. So you want to begin your educational campaign really talking about the real life humanity of transgender folks and the LGBT folks also in the community if your bill includes them, which theoretically it does because you can be both and. Just as a food for thought. So yeah, so make sure that you do that, and it's never too early to start this process. It can be really difficult to find different members of different communities to come share their stories, but really building those relationships with those community members and those community leaders to build trust and empower those folks to share their stories is really important, and I can't tell you how far that's gotten us here in Utah. With finding all the LDS Republicans and their parents who support trans folks. So big deal. Can't recommend that enough. So it's never too early to start that process. And in Maryland, just so you have some idea, it took 5 years of a consistent trans-specific education campaign to pass the bill before it passed. It was consistent. That can be how long it can take, so seriously, never too early to start. And make sure that there's like sweeping community education. This can be through your coalitional partners, which we're going to talk about more later, but you know, educating your different coalition partners, have the ACLU have their membership and do a trans inclusion training, and have them hear stories of trans folks and get them to like talk about how they support trans people too, things like this. But also, like, it goes beyond that, like making sure that you are talking to your everyday state residents about why these things are important. What we recognized in Maryland is, and actually in Utah, is most people thought that these laws were already there. We're totally protected. We don't need non-discrimination. So really talking about the real life stories, highlighting the identities and personal journeys people have gone through, while talking about like the real life impacts of not having this and what issues are facing the community are really big deals. So in Maryland, we did a PSA project, a public service announcement project, where we had different communities, including trans communities, really talking about why they wanted to see the non-discrimination ordinances and other things come through, but also humanizing the stories of trans people, if that makes sense. But we also had people on the ground in Maryland collecting postcards, talking to everyday constituents at farmers markets, being like, hey, do you think this is right? Do you support this? Great. This is why this is important, right? So there's that little bit of education in that too, which was super helpful in Maryland. Another great example is New Hampshire actually did a really great booklet. I don't know that much about it, but I know it was awesome. Somebody maybe knows something about it. Insert here.
Somebody does know something about it.
Right. Yeah, Mason, do you want to talk about it?
Yeah, sure. I can totally jump in there. So we, in New Hampshire, prior to working for MTPC, I was doing trans organizing work up in New Hampshire. And we decided to collect stories about, not specifically targeted towards employment non-discrimination, just life stories of trans people to put together in a nice little pretty booklet. I actually have a copy over there. I can go grab it. But it really has just stories of people's lives, and they highlight elements of discrimination faced, not, like I said, not targeted towards employment, but just general discrimination that people were facing, as well as highlighting the human story of all of the people involved. And it was fantastic. It's actually being used now to work on some of the license gender marker change stuff going on in New Hampshire. So it's been a fantastic tool, and it can be used not just for one element. If you collect general stories, you can use it over and over again just for general trans advocacy work.
It's called, by the way, it's called We Are New Hampshire, Transgender Lives in the Granite State. And the other thing we wanted to mention, also Mason is technically less affiliated with it, but now very affiliated with it, which is the I Am Trans People Speak campaign, which Mass Trans Political Coalition launched several years ago now, which is an amazing video project that has people talking about themselves, just being regular humans. Some of the stories focus on employment discrimination, some of them don't. But again, those were used a lot, actually, in the effort to pass the bill in Massachusetts successfully. So,
yeah.
All right, Owen, you want to do field team?
Oh, wait, I was going to just do one more thing. And in states where you might have a lot of things going on at one time, like my lovely home state of Utah, where we have everything under the sun related to LGBT, we are doing these blanket video projects. We have this project called the Transgender Awareness Project, where we're capturing these human stories, but we're capturing them in a way with all of the issues that we have going on, so it can be used for everything, very similar to the pamphlet and the I Am Trans video series. And it's getting actually airtime. People are interested in putting it on TV. What? Yeah. So I'm going to talk to you about field now. So this is what I know about field. Make sure you build a large field team, and dear Lord, do it as soon as possible. The reason that I say this is because so many people need to be talked to. And if you have a big field team of volunteers, allies, trans folk alike, calling and talking to everyday residents of your state about why these things are important and what the state of the state is around it, or the state of the city, if that's the case, right? Make sure that you're doing it. It is never, never too early to start doing field work, and it pays off tenfold to just do it. If you can't have a field team all year long, at least have one for the legislative session, because getting those calls from constituents into their legislators really does make a difference. In Utah for the first time this year for this session had a field program. And because of the efforts of the field team, we moved 16 legislators from being on the fence, some even leaning no to supporting, just from people who were their constituents calling them and being like, hello, Senator so-and-so, I live in your district, I vote, I'm a Republican, and I want you to do this. Like, it is magic how well it works. Please, dear Lord, do it. I'm done.
You're done, but now you got to do coalition building.
Oh, coalition building, my favorite. So it really is my favorite. I love doing coalition work. One of the reasons that I really like doing coalition work is because trans work is historically underfunded, which I think we can all agree. And even in the LGBT movement, non-discrimination does not get as many dollars as other projects. So I'm just going to leave that there. And so coalition work is some of the best ways that you can get the resources you need to get things done. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the coalitions. So there are some likely suspects that every state has that we can ask folks from each area to join. Some folks that I really want to encourage people to work with are other LGBT partners, your Pride Center, your PFLAG chapters, that kind of stuff. Women's organizations, the NOW chapters, Planned Parenthood, or NARAL. Great partners. Stand with us all the time. Awesome humans. Totally recommend them. Union folks. I actually have not met a union that refused to stand in solidarity on non-discrimination. Why? Because it's about employment. And what do unions do? They help us in employment. Unions, awesome. Faith groups, please get faith groups. Oftentimes when we're hearing opposition, at least if you are in a red state like me, it is going to be coming from your conservative Christians. If that's LDS, okay. If that is extreme conservative Baptist, okay. If that's Catholic, okay. Right? Like having faith leaders and lay leaders come out saying their journey story of why they support it, using the values and the lenses of their faith tradition really does make a huge difference. The ACLU, awesome people, always support us. And then other civil rights groups, I'm thinking of NAACP, and CAPIA is another great one, the National Black Justice Coalition. Folks that we can, these are just a few examples, but folks that we can think about when we're thinking about likely suspects. And then don't forget your national partners too, like NCTE. Great. So when we're thinking about this, we want to create a coalition that has broad support to work towards the law with community backing and input and leadership. So in Maryland, there was a huge coalition. It had over 100 members. It had a steering committee. It was awesome. Some lessons learned from that, as somebody who was there in the creation of the coalitions, are that sometimes the trans voices, because we did include some community voices to the steering committee and actually decision-making body, but sometimes they were overpowered because they didn't have as much resources they were bringing in. So really thinking about how to balance those things. Lesson learned, and I don't have an answer, just think about it. And Utah actually had a similar situation, but really making sure that we are empowering these folks to be everybody who we're bringing to the table to be leaders and spokespeople from the community. We're not leaving out trans folks when we're doing that. That includes trans people. So we want the coalition to be really diverse as well. So really thinking about the different people that we can get involved. So that might be having police departments as part of your coalition if you're seeing a lot of opposition to bathrooms or public safety. That may or may not include making sure that you have a lot of folks of color in Utah, we had to make sure that we were including immigrant rights organizations in our coalition because there's a lot of immigrants in Utah, and that was really important. We also had to include LDS people here, so faith folks, and making sure that there's really clear roles and goals. So what are you getting as a community partner from me? Like, I'm not just asking you for something as person convening the coalition. It's an actual relationship. It's like a friendship. I mean, I'm sure you've all had friends who only came to you to ask you for things and never offered anything, right? That stinks. It doesn't feel good. So it's about like making sure you're creating an actual relationship with folks where it's very clear that you're giving back or you've already given to. So I would also encourage those folks who have time and the ability to join other coalitions as well. Like Equality Maryland was part of the DREAM Coalition in Maryland, and we're active participants in that. And then also we're active participants in the repeal of the death penalty, right? So there was like a very clear give and take. We were there for each other. Clear roles and goals when you're thinking about like a Pride Center joining on, right? Like making sure that folks don't feel like you're stepping on their toes and them yours. Making sure it's very clear how you're going to work together. That is my best advice for that. Reciprocal relationship, clear roles and goals. So and also different levels of membership, right? Like there are going to be some organizations, your ACLU chapter, like ours in Utah, might be 2 people who are spread really thin. And can't come out to everything as much, but they can, so they can't come to the steering committee meetings, but they turn out their membership to every lobby day you have, things like that. So thinking about like different levels as well for people who want to be engaged. Yeah. I already talked about really awesome, huge things about Maryland. I got lost. I'm having a technical difficulty. So I wanted to talk a little bit about making sure that you're not things aren't too tightly controlled by the LGBT group. If it is a coalition, there actually does need to be some shared decision-making power. And I think that that could also include, depending on the state, the trans group. If the trans group is actually having a lot of power, making sure that, like, I'm not saying give up power, but I am saying making sure that there is space and room for other groups to like lead and make decisions. This is more applicable for LGBT groups, and especially when there has been some like mistrust or hurt between LGBT community or the LGBT group and the T community, I would highly recommend making sure that there is more involvement to like kind of offset some of the hurt and infighting that could potentially happen. And decision making, like really please have a strategy around how you're going to do decision making to make sure that like voices are heard. In 2011, I'm sure a lot of folks have heard about this, but in 2011 in Maryland, there was not a coalition. Well, it was a very loose coalition, and the trans community was not brought to the table, and a decision was made between the sponsor and the LGBT group that removed public accommodations without community consent from the bill, and that caused a huge amount of hurt. So that is an example of why we need to make these decisions as a whole community or a coalition. You need to have tons of trans people to lead it. I think that that's really important, especially if you are doing a trans standalone ordinance. Absolutely, like as many trans people as possible, I think is really key. I think even in states where it's LGBT ordinance, a lot of trans people in all areas of leadership, from leading the coalition meetings, to being able to vote on the coalition, to being the people who are reporting back from the field, who are also trans, right? Like, all levels need to have trans leaders. Can't emphasize that enough. Keep in mind that many of your coalition partners may or may not have trans competency. So really, like, reaching out to those folks with, like, loving compassion and offering to do some sort of trans competency, trans inclusion, whatever you want to call it, training with them, so that those people can be leaders and talk about everyone impacted by the issue, not just a certain group. And that also helps you when you do that, because like in Utah, we did a lot of trans competency trainings, and what that ended up looking like for us is the ACLU then reached out to a whole bunch of other organizations and got them on board, and then started talking to them about why trans people needed to be included. So more people stood behind us when the legislators came back to us and said, we want to remove trans people, right? Every organization involved said no, and that was awesome. So I think it's also really important to have roles and goals around, like, timelines, and articulate clearly, like, what the stages that we're in when we're talking about the campaign, and, like, where we want to see things going. And, like, making sure that, like, priorities are, like, very clearly spelled out, and the why, with room for discussion and talking about stuff. And then, yeah, I think I covered everything. Yeah, that's it. Thanks.
Great. Thanks so much, Owen. I just wanted to put out there, folks, we're probably going to run for about another 10 or 15 minutes. So I just wanted to let people know and give people a heads up for timing. So I think now, Lisa?
Yeah, no, actually, Owen, you got this first one too.
A lot of talking.
We put you all in order. Then I'll take a couple.
Great, that sounds like fun. Okay, so when we're thinking about preparing for challenges, I think that the #1 most effective way to deal with any problem that comes up really comes through really compassionate and thoughtful, vulnerable storytelling from the people who are impacted the most, really sharing their humanity and the values that they share with the people they're talking to, whoever the audience is, to pass any, like, state or local jurisdiction. This is, like, the bread and butter of inoculating against any one of the oppositional problems that could come up.
Owen, I was actually on the slide before, which reads building momentum through local laws and employer policies.
Ah, well, I've lost that one. One moment, please. This is really fun. Yeah, okay. Just kidding.
Okay.
Forget I said that. We can talk about it later.
Yes.
So passing local laws, great. So it's a strategy to build up why we need to do that. First is a strategy to build up why we need to pass these bills, and, like, to prove that there's no the sky does not fall when we pass these bills. So an example is in Utah, like, this strategy was super helpful because we were able to be like, you know what, this public safety issue did not happen, and everything was okay. And that was great, and that went a long way for us. But the way that cut the other direction for us was that a lot of folks were saying, oh, well, you have this law already, and we don't want big government, so we should not pass any more laws and just let all the jurisdictions do their thing. So that happened.
Yeah, I mean, usually, I was just going to say, like, usually it does help in the positive way. The more local laws you pass, the easier it is to get a state one done, or the more employer policies you pass, the easier it is to get a local one. But occasionally it does cut the other way. So it's a well-utilized strategy. It's a strategy that's being used in Pennsylvania and Michigan and all sorts of places to get closer and closer to passing a law. It really did help, actually, in Maryland when the opposition folks said, hey, the law in Montgomery County has caused sexual assault to happen in Montgomery County, and then the police chief of the county said, no, we've had this law in the books for several years, we've never had any incidents. So actually kind of the opposition created this great moment from the police chief being able to clarify that, in fact, these laws have done no harm at all. So that's one of the best things about them. The last couple things on this slide is talking about having a really good legislative lead sponsor who's a true champion for your bill, and not just a champion for the bill overall, but specifically for transgender people, and who understand transgender folks, who can explain what transgender means to their colleague legislators, and who can say, no, we're not even going to think about that amendment when the other legislators come to them and say, look, I'm just uncomfortable when it comes to the bathroom or whatever. We need really tough champions at that moment who are not going to fold. I've seen this go awry in numerous places where there's a very well-meaning but generally still clueless legislator who's at the lead, and many times the transgender or LGBT groups are kind of afraid to really get in there and do that education with the legislator because they're like, oh, it's a legislator. Right? Well, they're a person, and they know what they know about transgender people in large part from TV, and it can be very shocking what comes out of their mouths, including in hearings, right? So you gotta force them into doing moots with you, like have them, we in some places I've like helped prepare a whole binder of like questions, not a binder full of women, but a binder full of transgender people, right? Where it's it answers all the questions that we expect could potentially come up at a hearing or on the floor of the debate. And so they don't like spending time doing anything often, but you got to make them realize that they need to actually prepare for this stuff. And then the last thing we wanted to point out is the legislative language has got to be good. I talked just briefly about the problems that we've had with some legislative language more recently around sex-ed facilities. Please reach out to the national orgs to get drafting assistance. There are better and worse ways these laws can be written, and it can make a difference in implementation. So just be aware and reach out. So that's that. So we can go on to the next slide. Where Owen already talked about prevention strategies very eloquently, I may add, about the primary prevention strategy is to educate the public and legislators, but the public about transgender people. So that all of the bad stuff that they try to stick on these bills doesn't stick, because people have a kind of baseline understanding and have an instinct to defend trans folks from these attacks as opposed to believe them in the first place, right? So that's why prevention and that educational strategy is so important. Of course, we have to talk about the bathroom bill a little bit more. The answer to the bathroom bill problem is also to get real trans people into the media, right? We also need to get allies out there. This is where that large coalition that you built before, taking all of Owen's advice, really comes in handy, especially those women's organizations that are focused on violence, the Sexual Assault Coalition, the Domestic Violence Coalition. They can be very, very helpful in saying, we do not think that there's any problems with safety for women and children with these bills. In fact, we think that it's pro-women's, all women's safety, to pass these bills, and they can kind of knock the scare tactics out of the water. And remember, one of the biggest things about the bathroom bill thing is that you're going to win or lose this in the media in very large part, right? The media is either going to print all this stuff and educate the public about scary bathroom stuff, or the media is going to act as a filter. You have to convince them to act as a filter, and they're more likely to act as a filter if there's authorities on women's equality and children's equality, whatever, Children's Law Center, whatever. If they're saying things are fine, then if the media feels like they better not be printing the lies because they really are lies, or just the bold, wrong assertions of the opposition. So that's one of the reasons it's important. Also, cops and law enforcement. We talked about the police chief. So important. The New York City Police Commissioner came out for the Gender Expression Non-Discrimination Act in New York. An incredibly helpful moment to push away a lot of the opposition on that bill. When you're talking to reporters, make sure that you are sending these experts to them, cops, law enforcement, women's organizations. We also find rhetorically sometimes that trans men can be especially educational for an audience that are thinking in stereotypes and only about trans women on this issue. So that's those are things to keep in mind when you're working on dealing with bathroom bill challenges. The next challenge we have is business opposition. It's very often we can get a local chamber of commerce or a state chamber of commerce to just be neutral on the bill, and that is good enough in order to get the bill passed. But one of the kind of more interesting strategies that folks have been using in some places is with that magical field team that you built that Owen was talking about, is to actually do small business canvassing. So instead of going door to door to voters, you actually go door to door down the main street of the city that is in whatever district that you are trying to sway a legislator for, and say, hey, you know, flower shop, are you for non-discrimination? Will you, as a small business owner, sign on and support this bill? And you can get a lot of businesses that are very, you know, they're happy to sign. Sure, why not? Whatever. But the easiest way to do was to literally physically go and to their place and ask for the manager or the owner on some random Saturday, because the owner is there. It's a small business, right? So that can be especially helpful. Owen, did you want to talk about religious exemptions?
Sure. Religious exemptions can be a huge point. So making sure that we're neutralizing the church with some religious exemptions, but that aren't too broad. One of the really great ways of being able to do this is having faith leaders and other folks who are part of the predominant religions of your area come out and specify why they don't want that great of a religious exemption, or point out that there already are religious exemptions. Ways that we were able to actually kind of soften, they were going to make it real broad. And one of the ways that we found to kind of soften that was literally have an outpouring of LDS active church members who had returned home from mission talk to their legislators about how there already was religious exemptions and how they didn't feel threatened in their faith, and how they felt that they were able to worship the way that they would normally if people were allowed to have jobs and houses. So that's my job.
Great. So another challenge can be LGBT, well, we wrote LGBT, but we really mean LGB engagement, where sometimes, especially in a state that has marriage already, but it actually happens in states where there is no marriage yet, but everyone's just really attracted to working on marriage, that, you know, kind of the energy and volunteer time and excitement has been pulled towards the marriage topic, if it's still going on, or is the energy just all gone because now there's marriage and the LGBT folks are more complacent and more happy with their lives and just don't want to engage on non-discrimination. So that can be a huge problem to counteract. It can be counteracted with community education, town halls, forums. If there's some marriage forum going on, make sure you also talk about non-discrimination, things like that. Another way to work around the lack of engagement is to really remember that that coalition is really, really important here. In Connecticut, the biggest player in the coalition to pass the trans non-discrimination bill was actually a women's organization called the Connecticut Women's Education and Legal Fund. They were the big player. They carried the water because the LGBT organization folded because marriage had been won a couple of years before. So that's incredibly important, and you have to think about how you're going to work around or motivate LGBT people to either, if there is no LGBT law, non-discrimination-wise, to act in their self-interest, and if there is an LGBT portion but not trans protection, to activate their feelings of allyship, and to take action as an ally. So that's a challenge. Owen, you want to talk about the next two?
Yeah, so divisiveness in the community, when we're just speaking about trans community, can be a huge thing. I guess the greatest example I can talk to you about is this RuPaul situation where the trans community is literally like causing all kind of media about themselves fighting with themselves. That can be a huge problem, right? Because it gives the average Joe resident of your state this impression that there are these angry people running around fighting amongst themselves and then demanding these special rights. So really like trying to find ways of healing and validating those feelings, really big deal. And so in Utah, RuPaul actually just came here, and there was a huge hullabaloo here. And the Eagle Forum, who is one of our big oppositional groups in Utah, came out and they were saying that they released all these press releases talking about how we were fighting amongst ourselves and how we don't care enough about ourselves to not even to get along and work together. And doesn't this prove why we don't deserve to be included in protections in the law here? And they totally used it against us. So what we did here is we actually had a community leader meeting, had everybody off gas whatever they were thinking and feeling, and then came up a plan that we came up with together to deal with RuPaul coming to town. And we actually got really great positive media attention about real life stories of trans people and neutralized all the stories that were going to come out about what the Eagle Forum was saying. We neutralized that. And then the other thing to be prepared for is referendums. I don't know how many people are in states where referendums can happen, but always remembering if you are in one of those states that can happen and plan for the future. Make sure you're building towards anything that could that can help with that. So if you're having one of the great giant field teams like I'm suggesting, making sure that they understand that you're doing this community education to not just get folks to call their legislator now, but to vote to protect you later, right? Like, so really making sure that you've got a plan to deal with that. Maybe it's a decline to sign campaign, whatever. Making sure you have something in place to deal with the referendum.
All right, next slide. Okay, Owen, you're up again.
Great. Oh gosh. Media plan. Getting a media plan in advance, including earned and social media, is so important. It's one of your best ways to get out in front of oppositional stuff that can come down the line. It's much better to be on the offensive and explaining how you're a human being and you happen to be trans and look, you're a firefighter and you still should be able to save lives, right? And not get fired from your job, right? So things like that, really important. You can use videos of people's stories to get earned media, or actually use it in social media, and just making a plan with your coalition in advance to get more networks sharing the same links. Really big deal. Can't tell you how helpful it is. Please do that. And also then you're not on the defensive. And then story collection, we've talked about it a lot. It's because it's really important. Make sure that you have a lot of stories collected because different people are going to resonate with different people. And make sure that you're doing spokesperson training with all the folks that might be speaking to make sure that they're resonating with the people that they are meant to resonate with, whoever the audience is, right? The most impactful way that they can, really highlighting like that they're people, right? First, and that we have these shared values growing up in this state, this city, this country. So I'm not bringing it back to New Hampshire. Awesome booklet. Yeah, that is a great way of showing story collection. The Maryland Transgender Leadership Academy also included a whole day long, this is how you share your story, and this is how you do it in different ways, whether that be op-eds or media or to testify. So really doing that. So out of the folks that graduated Leadership Academy, all of them, so we had 25 solid spokespeople messengers able to share their story at the drop of a hat whenever we needed somebody to fit a specific lens or I don't know, group of people that we needed to talk to. We had such a diverse group of people that we had those people ready to go. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So, and there are tested non-discrimination messages out there that have been developed. The Movement Advancement Project has publications, some of which are online, more of them are secret, so you have to contact them or us, and we can get a hold of them. But they have basic non-discrimination messages that work. We do want to realize, however, that around the kind of trickier issues around access to bathrooms or facilities or dress codes or transgender teachers or anything like that, messages are very, very much in development, and we're still trying to figure out exactly how best to message this to the public to get them to understand. So use those messages, but use them with a grain of salt. And knowing that they need to be tailored also based on your own experiences and the conditions in your locality or state. Owen talked about having to tailor the messages to the LDS Church in Utah, where they had to kind of change the faith message to, instead of talking about following the golden rule and that, it to instead use a more LDS message about loving their common, one's common, what is it, loving your common man and witnessing their struggle.
Yeah, loving your common man.
Right.
Yep.
So, so you have to know your audience there. One of the things that people think is a good idea sometimes, though, is to exclude, to only present transgender people who kind of fit clearly into the male category or clearly into the female category, or who are passing or presentable or whatever kind of words you want to use. We really urge you to not exclude anyone from being a messenger. It doesn't matter that people are gender nonconforming or gender queer or not transitioning. We actually believe that we're going to go further ultimately if we share our entire community with legislators and the public. That can be, so don't exclude anyone. Don't say you don't look right, you don't talk right, etc. Can you guys still hear me? Okay. Can you hear me?
For a second. Yeah, you're fine.
Wait, can you hear me now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I got some weird little message on the audio. So we really believe you shouldn't exclude anyone. This is part of educating the world about the whole umbrella of, wonderful umbrella of transgender folks. And that the way to do that is just that people need to explain their trans experience, right? So whenever a trans person goes on TV or tells a story, they kind of need to break down the basics of, like, this is who I am today. I grew up as X, that's helpful for the audience to understand, especially for folks who aren't trans women. because the audience kind of expects trans women, but still, trans women should explain their experience as well. So got to break it down to talk about authenticity. I needed to transition to be myself. That type of authenticity has to come through. Owen, did you want to take the next three? Good and bad story.
Yeah. We really want to make sure that we're balancing those good and bad stories. One of the things the trans community has kind of an opportunity to do that our LGBT siblings don't when we're talking about non-discrimination is people actually believe that discrimination happens with us. They actually believe it, right? But making sure that we're not going overboard explaining like what can happen. So we can actually be the messengers sharing real discrimination stories for our LGBT siblings, but we need to make sure that we're not doing overkill. So making sure we also have success stories too, because what ends up happening is you cross this line and then people go from empathy, like wanting to take action, to more like sympathy and like pitying. So we want to make sure there's a good balance of these like great success stories, like I came out, my boss was awesome, this is what happened, here's a best practice, right? Or like, whoa, I got fired, I end up homeless, ooh, right? Like real life things, all while lifting up the humanity. Balance is super important. Another thing that we want to do is we want to make sure that we're including our families and the people who love and support us, right? So our allies, like we want to make sure that we're including them when we're talking. If we can have picture or have people stand with us if we're testifying, goes a huge long way, because people have this idea that trans people like live all by themselves and like are like free radicals is the word people use. I don't even know where that comes from, but are free radicals roaming about without any connection to anybody, which means that they could be a deviant or could hurt someone, right? So making sure that like our family members standing with us, like hand on our shoulder while we're testifying, like makes a huge difference. It shows we're not alone, and it lets people connect with us, because everybody has a family. Like they have parents, right, or they wouldn't be here, theoretically. Or like having your colleagues talk about like what it was like to witness you transition and how that was awesome. So showing that we have people we're connected to, big deal. And medium matters. So one of the things that we actually discovered recently was that because people don't know trans people, right, statistically it's like 10% of the population knows they know a trans person, but 80% of the population knows they know a gay, lesbian, or bisexual person, right? So one of the things that we've discovered is that people are really at this like not even to 101 level of like understanding our lives and our humanity. So having these things in video has been super helpful, because it allows people to do that like weird face, right, of like, I don't know what's going on, right, that people often have when they're experiencing a new thing. And they can do it in the privacy of their own home where it's a screen instead of a human standing right in front of them. And it allows them to then be able to hear whatever the message is, because they can do whatever they want with their face and still hear, and they're not being so self-conscious about their facial expression. So videos, high five, love them.
Okay, we've got a few takeaways. I'm going to zoom through mine, and then Owen's going to do his. Mine are that you really have to eat your vegetables, which means basically, even though you don't want to, you have to be doing this work with legislators when there's no chance the bill is going to pass, right? You know, so that you're ready to go when the conditions are right. You have that field team in place when the conditions are right, et cetera. So my second takeaway is to have that big team by asking for help. A lot of the time, some of us just really take things and just want to do it ourselves, but we really need that team. That team is what makes things possible. And then third, my last takeaway is to not cut people out. I just wanted to re-emphasize that, to make sure that everyone in the community trans people and allies are welcome to participate, and they should, and they can be educational. Owen?
Awesome. So I wanted folks to take away that when you're building coalitional relationships, to make sure that they are real and sustainable, because once we pass non-discrimination, we got a lot more to do in, I think, every state and as a nation. So, hey, make sure this is a real sustainable relationship with a clear understanding and expectation of how we're going to continue to work together in the future. Big deal. Be there for each other. It's a friendship. Don't be that jerk friend that always asks for things and never gives back. Don't be that guy. And then I wanted folks to think about who the right messenger at the right time is. It's not always trans folks that are the right messenger. Sometimes you need that police chief to come in and talk. And I know it's sometimes hard to give up that microphone when we're not given the platform so often. But sometimes really that police chief is the person that people are going to resonate the most with. And so really being humble and thinking about how you can lift other people while lifting your own message is really helpful. So remember, you're not always the right messenger. And then having community consensus or commitment and a community that is involved in this process in a real way. I can't tell you the amount of headache it will solve you, and the more people you have to lean on, because you know what, we're not enough people. The people on this call aren't enough people, and we really need to be thinking about how we're empowering more folks to be leaders. And one of the best ways to do that is to lead with people and to get their expertise and experience in the space, and also share your own. So we're learning and growing together. So yeah, community, consensus, more people. Go get them.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Owen. So we have some time here for people to type their questions. I don't see any questions right now in the chat or question section. So I'm going to give you an opportunity if people have specific questions. I realize we've gone over the time, but give people that chance to ask those questions. And while you're typing that, what I want to do is just announce some of the upcoming webinars that we'll be doing with the Trans Advocacy Network. So on Monday, May 19th, we'll be doing a webinar about workforce training and Trans 101 for employers and what a trans-inclusive workplace looks like, some model policies for workplaces. In July, July 21st, we'll be doing a webinar about rural organizing, something I'm really passionate about and excited about. And then in August, August 25th, we'll be talking about fundraising, which I think a lot of people are probably interested in. September, we'll be talking about messaging. And in October, we're planning to talk about Health Advocacy 101 for individual and system level advocacy work. So those are some upcoming webinars that the Trans Advocacy Network will be doing. The dates are tentative, but are looking good. So if people have the opportunity, we'd love to see you there. And I don't see any questions. Anand, can I get your input that I'm not seeing any questions?
There is one message from Vicki, and Vicki says, we have lots of work to do here in Tennessee, but it is time to start.
Awesome. Love it.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So with that, if there's no more questions, here's some more information about the Trans Advocacy Network, our website, and one of our sponsors who helped us make this webinar possible, the Gill Foundation, so thank you to them. And thank you for everyone for your attention for this slightly longer webinar, but I think it was packed full of really fantastic information, and a special thank you, of course, to Owen and Lisa for being here to share their wisdom, knowledge, and expertise in this area. So thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon and evening.
Good night.
Have a good night, everyone. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.